Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the glamorous, scandalous, and utterly captivating world of Los Angeles fashion. Today is a beautiful day to unravel the latest dramatic twists, so let us jump right into the heart of the storm brewing at Forrester Creations. The dust has barely settled on the cataclysmic runway debut of Hope by Logan, and the shockwaves are still violently tearing through the foundational pillars of Forrester Creations. Hope Logan Spencer's sudden and secretive defection to Katie Logan's rival fashion house has left a trail of absolute devastation in its wake. By hijacking the international press corps and completely eclipsing Eric Forrester's highly anticipated haute couture return, Hope did not just make a shrewd business maneuver. She declared an all-out war on the family that raised her. At the very epicenter of this emotional earthquake stands Brooke Logan Forrester. Shattered by her daughter's unfathomable lies and deception, Brooke had just begun to sharpen her claws, vowing to unleash a vengeance so fierce that both Katie and Hope would pay the ultimate price for their treachery. But fate, in its infinite and cruel irony, had a far more sinister script prepared for the Logan matriarch. Right at the very moment when Brooke was meticulously drafting her retaliatory strike against the newly minted Spencer-Logan alliance, she received a phone call from her physician that would alter the trajectory of her life forever. Summoned to a sterile, brightly lit medical office that stood in stark, unforgiving contrast to the velvet and silk of her fashion empire, Brooke was handed a death sentence. The diagnosis was liver cancer, aggressive and rapidly advancing. In the span of a single heartbeat, the fiery indignation that had fueled her desire for revenge was met with the icy, paralyzing grip of mortality. The doctor's words echoed in the quiet room, detailing the severity of the tumor and the urgent need for aggressive intervention. But Brooke's mind was already miles away, locked in a fierce internal battle between her failing biology and her unyielding pride. For a woman who has spent her entire life navigating the treacherous waters of high fashion, corporate espionage, and scandalous romances, vulnerability has never been an option. Brooke Logan Forrester is a survivor, a fighter, and above all, a proud matriarch who refuses to be looked down upon. Instead of collapsing into the comforting arms of her husband or seeking the sympathetic tears of her family, Brooke made a chilling and resolute decision. She would bury this diagnosis deep within the vault of her own suffering. She would not allow her illness to become a weapon for her enemies, nor would she permit it to become an object of pity for the daughter who had just stabbed her in the back. The sheer thought of Katie gloating over her weakness, or Hope shedding guilty, hypocritical tears at her bedside, was entirely repulsive to Brooke. Her pride demanded that she remain a towering fortress of strength, even as the foundation of that fortress was actively crumbling from within. This vow of silence plunged Brooke into an agonizing, solitary hell. Day after day, she forced herself to march into the executive suites of Forrester Creations, her face meticulously contoured with expensive cosmetics to mask the ashen pallor of her skin. She endured the visceral, physical torment of her failing liver, the sharp, stabbing pains in her abdomen, the overwhelming waves of nausea, the bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to pull her to the floor at any given moment. Yet, she stood tall in the boardroom, her voice steady and commanding as she strategized with Ridge and Steffy on how to counter the media frenzy surrounding Deke Sharp's spectacular designs for Logan. Brooke was fighting a brutal-to-front war, one against the corporate sabotage orchestrated by her own sister and daughter, and the other against the rogue cells multiplying silently within her own body. As the days bled into weeks, the physical toll of her secret became impossible to entirely conceal. Ridge Forrester, a man who knows every contour of his wife's face and every nuance of her spirit, began to notice the alarming changes. He saw the way her tailored designer suits began to hang loosely on her shrinking frame. He felt the slight tremor in her hands when he held them, and he noticed the hollow, haunted look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Ridge's heart ached with a tender, desperate concern, and he gently confronted her, begging her to see a doctor, to rest, to let him take care of her. But Brooke, armed with the tragic reality of recent events, spun a masterful and devastating lie. Looking into her husband's eyes, Brooke blamed her rapid physical deterioration entirely on her shattered heart. She wept, entirely genuine tears born of both physical agony and emotional despair, claiming that Hope's betrayal had broken her from the inside out. She told Ridge that the stress of watching her own flesh and blood conspire with Katie to destroy Eric's legacy was eating her alive, that the grief of losing her daughter to the enemy was a weight she simply could not bear. It was a brilliant, tragic deception. Ridge, already boiling with protective fury over Hope's treason, swallowed the lie completely. His anger toward Hope mutated into a dangerous, blinding rage, for he now believed that Hope's corporate defection was actively destroying his wife's health. The tragedy of their shared misunderstanding only deepened Brooke's isolation, locking her further into a prison of her own making. While Brooke withered away in silence, the world outside continued to spin in a dizzying frenzy of fashion and fame. Across town at the Spencer Publications Tower, Katie Logan and Bill Spencer were popping champagne, aggressively celebrating their strategic masterstroke. They were basking in the glow of the media spotlight, completely oblivious to the fact that the sister they were so gleefully defeating in the press was secretly fighting for her very life. Hope, too, was riding the high of her newfound autonomy. She was answering questions from the press, posing for magazine covers, and reveling in the creative freedom she finally possessed. Yet, beneath her triumphant smile, Hope carried a heavy, nagging guilt. She had publicly admitted that Brooke knew nothing of her move, and despite Liam's constant reassurances that her mother would eventually forgive her, a dark sense of foreboding lingered in Hope's heart. She had no idea how right she was to be afraid. The tipping point arrived with terrifying suddenness. Brooke's aggressive cancer, fueled by the immense psychological stress of the family feud and the lack of proper medical intervention, reached a critical mass. During a high-stakes meeting at Forrester Creations, the facade finally cracked. Brooke's vision blurred. A wave of blinding pain tore through her torso, and before Ridge could even reach across the desk to catch her, she collapsed onto the cold marble floor. The ensuing chaos was a blur of screaming sirens, frantic paramedics, and a terrified Ridge holding his unconscious wife's hand as the ambulance sped toward the hospital. The walls of secrecy Brooke had so carefully constructed were instantly obliterated by the harsh, fluorescent lights of the emergency room. When the doctors finally emerged to speak with Ridge, the truth fell like a guillotine. It was not a broken heart that was killing Brooke Logan Forrester, it was end-stage liver cancer. The medical team explained that her liver was failing rapidly, poisoned by the aggressive tumors, and that her only chance of survival was an immediate, emergency liver transplant. The news sent shock waves of sheer horror through the Forrester family. Ridge was paralyzed by a sickening mixture of grief and realization, understanding finally why his wife had been fading away right before his eyes. The immediate priority shifted from corporate warfare to a desperate, frantic race against the clock to find a compatible organ donor. Family members were quietly and hastily tested, blood drawn, and tissues typed in a desperate bid to save the beloved matriarch. Steffy, Ridge, Eric, and even extended family members offered themselves without hesitation, but the results returned one by one with crushing disappointment. The genetic markers were too specific, the compatibility windows too narrow. Time was rapidly running out, and Brooke was slipping further into the shadows, her body connected to a symphony of beeping monitors and intravenous lines that were the only things tethering her to the living world. And then the universe delivered its ultimate, cruelest twist of fate. A secret, expedited medical screening revealed that there was exactly one person whose biological markers, blood type, and tissue compatibility formed a perfect, flawless match for Brooke. It was Hope Logan Spencer, the very daughter who had orchestrated the ultimate betrayal, the woman who had publicly humiliated Forrester Creations and shattered Brooke's trust, was now the sole key to her mother's survival. The irony was so thick, so deeply poetic and tragic, that it seemed almost orchestrated by a vengeful deity. When Liam received the call and relayed the horrifying truth to Hope, her glamorous new world shattered into a million meaningless pieces. The fashion lines, the press conferences, the autonomy she had fought so hard to achieve it all instantly dissolved into irrelevance. The crushing weight of her guilt, which she had been trying to suppress with the thrill of success, suddenly multiplied 1,000-fold, morphing into a suffocating panic. Her mother was dying, and she had spent her mother's final conscious weeks waging a petty, vindictive war against her. Without a second thought, Hope abandoned the Logan Empire, sprinting through the hospital corridors with tears streaming down her face. Desperate to offer her flesh, her blood, her very life to save the woman she had so deeply wounded. Hope burst into the intensive care unit, the sterile, antiseptic smell of the room hitting her like a physical blow. There lay Brooke, a pale, fragile shadow of the vibrant, indomitable woman she had always been. The sight of her mother, tethered to life support machines, broke Hope completely. She collapsed to the cold linoleum floor, crawling to the side of the hospital bed, her hands trembling as she reached out to grasp Brooke's frail fingers. Hope fell to her knees, weeping with a raw, primal agony, begging the universe for a chance to make things right. She pleaded with the doctors, demanding that they take her into surgery immediately, offering a piece of her own body as a desperate, bloody penance for her sins. Brooke, drifting in and out of a pain-induced haze, slowly opened her eyes to see her daughter kneeling at her feet. The monitors beeped a steady, rhythmic testament to the fragile thread of life still pulsing through her veins. Hope's voice was choked with sobs as she poured out her apologies, begging Brooke to accept the transplant, pleading for the chance to atone for the betrayal that had torn them apart. It was a moment of profound, earth-shattering vulnerability, a collision of desperate maternal longing and unbearable guilt. Hope laid her soul bare, offering the ultimate sacrifice to bridge the chasm she had created. But the pride of Brooke Logan Forrester, even in the shadow of death, remained an immovable mountain. As she looked down at the daughter who had aligned with her enemies, the daughter who had smiled for the cameras. While Brooke suffered in agonizing silence, something cold and resolute hardened within the matriarch's heart. The wound of Hope's betrayal was too fresh, too deep, and too visceral to be washed away by a sudden act of biological charity. Brooke slowly pulled her fragile hand away from Hope's desperate grasp. Her voice, though weak and raspy, carried the sharp, undeniable edge of absolute finality. Looking directly into Hope's tear-drenched eyes, Brooke delivered a devastating verdict. She flatly and unequivocally refused the transplant. She would not accept a piece of a daughter who had stabbed her in the back. She would not allow her continued existence on this earth to be forever indebted to a traitor. The sheer magnitude of Brooke's wounded pride eclipsed her fundamental instinct for survival. In her mind, accepting Hope's liver would be the ultimate surrender, an admission that she needed the very person who had tried to destroy her family's legacy. Brooke made it chillingly clear she would rather embrace the cold, silent embrace of death than live with the constant, humiliating reminder that she owed her life to the enemy. The fallout from this cataclysmic decision was instantaneous and explosive. Hope was left sobbing on the floor, utterly destroyed by the realization that her mother's hatred for her actions was stronger than her desire to live. Ridge, witnessing the horrific standoff, was torn between his desperate need to save his wife and his profound understanding of her shattered trust. The news rippled out of the hospital room, crashing into Steffy, Katie, and Bill, instantly halting the corporate war in its tracks. The bitter feud between Forrester and Logan had suddenly escalated from boardrooms and runways into a literal, suffocating tragedy of life and death. The entire fashion dynasty now holds its collective breath, watching in horrified awe as a mother's wounded pride and a daughter's desperate plea for redemption culminate in a catastrophic, heartbreaking standoff where love, betrayal, and mortality collide.